foundation was founded or registered in 1996. It's based in Bartica Region 7. They've been working with persons infected and affected by HIV, but by all means of education, outreach, home-based care, ECT, and legal film services.
Lifeline Counseling is an NGO which caters to care and support for people living with or affected by HIV, similar to a foundation through education, economic strengthening, capacity building. We have worked with MSMs in the past, but through another project, not USAID. We've tried to resuscitate that, but given our strong foundation in care and support and the dwindling USAID funds, our efforts to work in that area were shut down. But we still try through our MOU with SASA to cater to the needs of MSMs. And so we get referrals and so on from SASA to provide counseling and care for MSMs. We have MSMs enrolled in our program who are PL-HIV, so that's basically a bit about it.
I'm from the G+ organization, the network of diabetes.
You start from there?
G+, the network of diabetes living and affected by HIV/AIDS. G+ is an organization that was formed in 1996 by Andres O'Brien, Jocelyn Cummings, and Lloyd Talbot. Later got registered in 1997. So it's an offspring out of the Caribbean Regional Network of people living with HIV/AIDS. So we are the National Army Guyana. From the inception of the USA funding, G+ was one of the organizations which would have received USA funding in the areas of care and support, as well as prevention. Juanita Burrowes, United Virginia. We were 5 years old. We functioned in 2007 without any funding. We sustained on our own. We were funded by USAID. We registered in 2008. In 2009, we were funded by USAID for HIV/AIDS prevention with MSM, work with the MARCS program, MSM and FSWs. But for us, we do on the side literacy classes because in 2006 we take 416 children off the street of New Amsterdam, give them free Happy Meal program, and that was done through our fundraising, literacy classes, and we would help by their schools and stuff like that.
Transitional House was launched in 2008. We are a drug rehabilitation and reintegration program, dealing primarily heavily on reintegration. Our target groups are drug addicts, deportees, abused persons, and our special interests are drug prevention within school and out school youth.
10 years now, but not until this year was registered. It's an organization that seeks to work with primarily the MSM community and more so youths who have been, because of either their HIV status or because of their sexuality, have been displaced from society. Because we find most of them are put out by family. We have some as young as 13 who are then displaced, and the need for a safe space which is created at our office in Leopold Street.
Is that you don't hear from these individuals unless you make contact with because I know that I'm a man that I get on my phone, you know, I walk people on the internet all the time.
Yes.
You know, pretty much, right? And I'm a communicative type person, and you know, I like to keep it that way. So I'm really into that networking and partnershiping. And the thing that what I smiled about was with them, with Desiree saying that the fact that drug users, it came to the table and they said that it has not impacted the country. And we could show I could stand up to show in many areas how it impacted the country. From tourism all the way up. Okay.
What vulnerable populations they have identified? Because I don't know about any consultation happening to develop a plan in the first place. So I think those of us who have been invited should make every effort to attend this very important meeting. Also, when it comes to drug users, I haven't seen any evidence-based report on drug users and HIV and this particular population. What I have seen is that, and the only place I've seen it is in the UNGAS, or the Global Responses Report as we now call it. They would ask specifically about injecting drug use.
I think the exclusion of particular socially stigmatized groups from the definition of vulnerable groups in the non-state actors component of the CARIFORUM 10th European Development Fund has very, very negative and long-term implications. This was really an opportunity for the region to address the issues faced by those groups that really operate and live on the fringes, on the margins of society, and to really structurally address those issues and bring those groups into the mainstream and have their issues heard and have the issues that they're faced with dealt with at the highest levels. And to exclude these groups from participation in this process, to dilute them as just other groups with no or any kind of significant consideration for the issues of vulnerability they face, I think we've done a disservice not just to the populations but to the entire Caribbean region.
And about vulnerable populations being excluded, I am lost for words, and I feel that at this time we need to get serious about what it is that we want to do and where we want to go. If vulnerable populations are not included, then who are we working with and for?
CARIFORUM, for CARIFORUM, I just want them to know that excluding the vulnerable group would be putting people more at risk, and they need to really look at the who is really the vulnerable population, because when they start talking about vulnerable people and most at risk people, they started talking about sex workers, MSM, transgender, drug users, and they need to include these people. These people are very, very vulnerable. Vulnerable to the law, vulnerable to the HIV, vulnerable to being harassed by society and everything. This is the vulnerable population who feel the harsh end of the stick, and we are prepared to let our voices get out there, because we would not be pushed aside. We as the vulnerable population is willing to stand up to whatever consequences it is, because we must be inclusive as the vulnerable committee.
Together, and one of the important things that came out of our meeting was that we need to come together to speak with one voice. Because we always say there is power and strength in numbers. And the Network for Community Commitment, an entity that was formed years ago out of the USAID project, now being registered as an independent entity, is well positioned to be the body where we can bring NGOs together working on social issues in Guyana to address it collectively. I think we agreed to that at our meeting on Wednesday, and I think that's the way forward. So today again at the second meeting, the same sentiments were felt. But if we could pull the group together and stay together and have meetings, albeit quarterly or whenever we decide that, we could make a difference, especially where applying for funding is concerned. We are now in the process of registering the organization. The documents are with the lawyer. It should be done shortly, and as soon as that is done, then we're going to open for membership, because we have to sustain the organization. And so we're going to have membership dues, and then we're going to do our own fundraisers, try to get a little office space where we can meet and send out emails for meetings and that kind of thing. So I'm excited about it. I think it's a wonderful thing. It's going to be the first of its kind in Guyana, a kind of a coalition of NGOs working on social issues. And so we're going to go public about it. We're going to ask the Minister of Health to come in. We're going to do our launching so that we get their buy-in as well and become a recognized body in Guyana. So I'm really excited about it. I know it's going to work. We just have to hold one head and go ahead with this.
This meeting, even though it was impromptu, a lot of vital information was shared, a lot of new information was given out in terms of fundings and different vulnerable groups. What I do like about the entire process, the meetings, is that we realize that funds are there for vulnerable groups, yet they're not being given to the organization that's work with them. A meager percentage of the entire package, should I say, of the funding is actually meeting to the real beneficiaries. We have learned ways and means whereby we can come together as community-based organizations, civil society organizations, and advocate for more funding and get us involved in the whole strategic planning of getting the funding to the beneficiaries. At the moment, we've been funded, Hope Foundation has been funded, yes, but again, on a very little basis. A Hope Foundation is, what should I say, it's not a targeted population by NGO, it's more of a general population. But then as the issues come forward, the social issues come up, then we go and target those groups, such as the MAPS population, the OVCs, the HBCs, the minors, what have you. And in that is how we get funding to do that. Again, as I said, it was very enlightening to know the different procedures involved in getting funding and how we can go about lobbying, advocating for these funding to actually reach us so that we can get the beneficiaries to benefit from that. Again, as I said, it was very impromptu, but very informative.
There are meetings on Wednesday and Thursday, and today rather, it's a more of an eye-opener as it relates to how civil society needs to get organized and collectively have one voice and ensure that representation at all levels representing vulnerable population remains on the table. So it's more of a coordinating effort in coming together. As it relates for G+, we are the network of Guyanese living with and affected by HIV/AIDS. It is and today the only organization in Guyana formed by people living with HIV and AIDS to provide support to persons living with HIV and AIDS. We have been, and at inception was funded, but currently from 2008 to present, there is no funding for us. There is a need for more support in our work. So we will invite and accept any form of support being given in terms of capacity building, assisting with our functions, because the thing is, funders see, or governments rather see, civil society organization in terms of not having enough capacity. But we're saying that they should chip in and help us to build that capacity rather than saying we don't have the capacity. Yeah.
Today's activity was a very heartening one, encouraging, because first of all, we were able to come together as a group of NGOs, and I don't think that we come together as often as we should. The fact that we have decided at the end of the activity that we will be sharing more information, especially where the donor community and so is concerned. In terms of the Global Fund and the CVC's intervention into Guyana, that's a welcome one, because the vulnerable groups, as one person said, the vulnerable groups need to be focused a little bit more, particularly the commercial sex workers and the LGBT community and the MSM. So I would like to encourage the CVC to continue with the impetus that they have started, and we do hope that Guyana will benefit from phase 2 of the Global Fund project.
Provides a forum for learning and for, as I said, Wednesday empowerment. Wednesday's session was for me empowerment based in terms of the role of the CCM, because we recently learned, as you would have highlighted, that in civil society only accessed funds from the Global Fund last year. We didn't know that we could have accessed funds for all this time that the Global Fund has been around. Meetings like this, service empowerment for me, builds on knowledge. And for today's session, well, the opportunity for partnerships with civil society, because even though it's there, there's not a strong partnership as should be, so that we can advocate for issues affecting us, such as the issue with the vulnerable populations. So I think this is very encouraging, and I look forward to strengthening partnerships with my colleagues and also CVCC and other networks.
Okay, I'm a proud gay and HIV positive person for the past 13 years, and definitely I will say without any hesitation that a lot is not really being done, for the MAPS population, the men who have sex with men and who are also PLs. And currently, like I said, I work in the mining town of Region 10 and under the USAID GHAR project. This is our second year of being financed, and in our first year our target was supposed to be 50 and we surpassed it by 25, so our reach were 75. And what I do know is that because of lending being very homophobic and discriminating, in my second year I'm now being able to tap into the men who have sex with men who do not self-identify as either gay, bisexual, or even anything that has to do with these subgroupings. And I've been able to have these capacity strengthening intervention, provide counseling and testing for them. But as a result, it's because of my social networking, my technique, and maybe because of, I don't know, something about me that they gravitate towards, nevertheless. But it is a pleasure. But I believe that there's more that needs to be done, because even some of the persons are gravitating towards sex work. And as we know, being an MSM is already high risk, and then adding additive high risk behaviors compounds the whole situation of intervention and efforts in combating, behavior change.
Well, I feel the CVC meeting was very much needed at this point in time. Number one, because specifically there's a lot going on in the government bodies that we, the local groups who are dealing with these issues, are not being notified. There's documents that's going out saying that we agree to this specific area, that the government can fund it and take care of it, like specifically speaking, like in the case of deportees and reintegration of prisoners. The government claimed that they can do this on a national level, and yet they collect the funds and it's not being done. I am the founder of Transitional House Guyana, the only drug rehabilitation and reintegration program of its kind in Berbice. Actually, it's in the whole of Guyana. And we are faced with the bulk of the work because there's no other agency that does what we do. And yet the government is collecting money on this specific cause and dealing with discrimination and so forth, and yet it's not being administered to the beneficiaries. So I feel this meeting is very important, and I feel that we need to come together as a collective voice and be heard and get things across so that the beneficiaries could get the specified funds and programs that is needed.
I think the vulnerable population is an important part an important part of the work that we're doing. Them being excluded from the CARIFORUM it's detrimental. This has happened in the past where there's not a lot of focus on the vulnerable community. For our country, it is still against the law. It is still against the law where MSMs are concerned, buggery, commercial sex work, these things are still against the law. It is still a challenge. Although government does work with the community, there's still harassment from the police. Not as much as before, but it still happens. And I think more involvement of the community, not only to go out and work with them, but to bring them in and let them be a part of the planning process. Because I think a lot of times people who are not from the vulnerable community sit down and make decisions for the vulnerable population. So I think even though we are working with the vulnerable population, I can say that I am working with the vulnerable population. I don't think that they're involved in the creation of the programs that are made for them. And so I think more of that needs to be done. And so we need to get the vulnerable population involved. It's important not only for them, but for us, because this is a cycle. And we have a lot of bisexual people. And so if we ensure that they're safe and they do the right things, then we will be safe also. Our partners will be safe. So I think it's very, very important. And I'm glad that the focus is being placed there, especially in the Global Fund, USAID, PEPFAR funding on the vulnerable population. But again, I say they must be involved in the creation of the programs.
For me, coming from an organization that's particularly new to this gathering, I think it's a very good initiative, and also a kind of welcoming in terms of the unity, because one of the things that I think is particularly important is that we need to understand that we all represent minorities within minorities, and the collaboration and the unity in terms of being able to work a common front to be able to address the necessary issues and to seek maybe perhaps to get the funding that you want in a seamless way, responsibly, is definitely important in terms of making sure we collaborate. And that happened, and hence my being here today. And from all the contributions given, it's indicative that this is the way to go, and persons are that inclined by organizations.
Really good, because real grassroots people who are out there working with the MAPS program and the vulnerable kids, we feel really good about this meeting. I'm happy that you're here in Guyana, Mr. Ian McKnight, because we can see your passion for what you're doing, and we're happy that you can also see our passion for what we are doing and can able to take back to your organization so many vital information. And we look forward for your kind support and your continuous support to embrace and support what we are doing here with the most at-risk population, also the vulnerable children, the drug users and substance user, and the entire vulnerable group in Guyana here. Thank you so much, and we look forward for your kind support.
It's been a very interesting meeting with different community groups here in Guyana. It was an opportunity to sound them out on the possibility of participating in phase 2. It was also an opportunity for me to get some answers to some of the comments that I'd heard from other people about sort of some of the challenges that we might experience working with Guyana in the second phase. You know, in terms of there already being a lot of funders supporting projects with vulnerable groups here. And what we learned essentially was that a lot of those funding sources had dried up. Also, some of the important grassroots organizations weren't accessing those funds, and so there was definitely a need to access funding to do work. Another thing that impressed me, I think, a lot about some of the groups present was the extent to which they relied on funding, self-fundraising efforts and supporting their work through that rather than typically through donor-funded work. And I think that's very encouraging, it's something that we can also maybe learn from in the rest of the Caribbean. And one of the things that we had planned for the second phase was to support initiatives that looked for a degree of self-financing, of income generating through social enterprises and other activities of that nature. So for me, it's been a really great opportunity to meet again with certain groups that I know, and to encounter new groups that, well, not necessarily new groups, but groups that I wasn't aware existed. And yeah, I think there seems to be quite a bit of enthusiasm. I explained essentially the process to them in terms of shortlisting, or the next step after the shortlisting of the 4 countries, and so I think we will get a good response in terms of the self-assessments that follow, and the support with getting approval from the CCM.
I think our conversations over the last couple of days have been groundbreaking in many ways. For the first time in Guyana, we have civil society coming together to advocate for changes around how a funding mechanism is administered in the country. So I think that's very important, that the key stakeholders are seeing their role and advocating for their stake in the process. It's important that we found a mechanism to move forward with the collaborations and the partnerships in the form of the Network for Community Commitments, and with very clear next steps about how organizations join that network and how we will move the agenda forward in that regard. Also very clear that we made a strong case for representation from civil society on the country coordinating mechanism of the Global Fund should be reflective of our views, of our voices, and the diversity within the civil society community, and especially hold very significantly the views of the populations that are most affected by HIV, and hold their views as central to the response. And I think decision-making bodies like the Global Fund, CCM, need to take that clearly into consideration, and that's something we need to structurally address in the Guyana context. And we're a lot clearer in our minds, and people are a lot more on the same page in terms of how we move forward and advocate for that.